Never far from a headline or a fresh idea for this country, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders is one of the biggest names in politics today. He's running for president while continuing to push for new legislation in the Senate. He has plenty of money and goodwill to draw upon after his run 4 years ago. But even with all that, he has a unique challenge this time around. In nearly every poll, he's near the top of the field of more than 20 Democratic candidates. Yet in nearly every early poll, he's trailing former Vice President Joe Biden. And now in Sanders' neighboring state of New Hampshire, polling shows Mr. Biden with a 2-to-1 advantage over the senator. And Mr. Biden went even further this week, publicly predicting a short primary race. Joining me now on Politics Nation, Bernie Sanders. Thank you for joining us, Senator.
Good to be with you, Al.
But, Senator, I want to get to your legislation that you and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez has proposed. But I have to ask you, with New Hampshire's polling saying your neighboring state that Joe Biden is 2-to-1 ahead, is there a point where you start going after Joe Biden? Will you confront him in the debates? Will you confront him to show the difference between Biden and Bernie?
Well, Al, if you look at that particular poll, they had 2/3 of the people that they reached out to were over the age of 50, and that's not the way the people in New Hampshire vote. I think it was a selection of older people, which is not accurate. I feel very good about the campaign. We have over 1 million volunteers. There was a poll that came out just a little bit before that had us winning in New Hampshire, and I'm confident we are going to win in New Hampshire. And the reason I think we're going to win this election, win the primary election and defeat Trump, is that the issues that we are talking about are the issues that are on the hearts and minds of the American people. And that is the incredible corporate greed that we are seeing and what unfettered capitalism is doing to this country. What Alexandria and I talked about, Al, was the absurdity of Wall Street making tens of billions of dollars by charging working people outrageously high interest rates, 20, 25% on loans that people need to take care of their basic needs. You're looking at the pharmaceutical industry making tens of billions in profits, charging us the highest prices in the world for medicine. You're looking at the insurance companies charging us, having a situation where we spend twice as much per capita on health care as the people of any other nation. They're making huge profits. CEOs of corporations make 300 times what their workers making. And I think what the American people are saying, enough is enough. We need an economy. We need a government that works for all of us, not just the 1%. And that's what our campaign is about. And that's
so are you pledging that you will not go negative on Joe Biden to close the gap in the national polls? Are you pledging that you are going to just run on policy and not get into personal attacks, even in a debate?
Look, I detest what takes place so often in a modern campaign, and my family has been a victim of that. I mean, ugly, disgusting opposition research, trying to rip apart people. That is not what politics should be about, and it's certainly not what should be taking place in the Democratic primary.
So Joe Biden can relax that you're not coming with personal attacks. Well, how will you distinguish your record, since you and he are considered the front runners by just about every poll? How do you distinguish yourself from Joe Biden? Why, if I'm watching this show, do I choose Bernie over Biden?
Well, I think you look at our records. I think you look at our votes that we have cast. Joe spent a long, long time in the Senate. I've been there for 13 years. I was in the House before that. And I think you look at what our vision is for the future of this country. And I think if people take a hard look at my voting record, my vision, it's quite different than Joe Biden's is.
But he says he's the most progressive guy in the race. You would concede that?
No, I don't think that Joe is the most progressive candidate in this race. Look, I think if you look at my voting record, if you look at my vision, if you look at the fact that over the last 4 years, Al, the Democratic Party and much of America has moved in the direction that I talked about 4 years ago. You know, 4 years ago, I said, we got to raise that minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour. And people said, Bernie, you're crazy. It's too extreme. Well, you got 7 states in the country that have already done that. The House of Representatives will soon do that. When we talked about Medicare for all, people said, nobody in America would support that. Poll after poll understands that health care is a human right, not a privilege. We should not be spending twice as much per capita on health care as any other nation. We should move toward Medicare for all. Climate change. 4 years ago, I said that we have to be bold in transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel. We got to take on the coal companies and the oil companies and the gas companies. We got to move to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. Criminal justice reform, immigration reform, making public colleges and universities tuition free. Those are ideas that I talked about 4 years ago, and I'm very happy that many candidates, from dog catcher on to candidates for president of the United States, are talking about exactly those issues.
So in many ways, you're moving the party further and further to your thinking and away from the thinking of people like Mr. Biden. Are you going to confront that in the primaries, or are you just going to talk policy and hope people get it on their own?
No, look, what an election is supposed to be about, to my mind, Al, is not disgusting personal attacks on people's families or on who they are. And right. I will never do that. But should we talk about, differences of opinions that we've had? I helped lead the effort as a member of Congress against the war in Iraq. And if you go to YouTube, hear my speeches about what I feared would happen in terms of the destabilization of that region. Joe voted for the war. I was very strong in opposition to our trade policies, whether it's NAFTA or permanent normal trade relations with China, because I did not want to see American workers thrown out on the street as their jobs moved to low-wage countries. Joe supported those trade agreements. I voted against the Wall Street legislation, which made it easier for banks to merge, and which, in my view, helped lay the groundwork for the Wall Street collapse of 2008. Joe voted the other way. I think, more recently, Joe talks about a middle road for climate change. Well, I think, that climate change is an existential threat to our planet. And the scientists tell us we got 12 years to aggressively transform our energy system before we have irreparable harm to our country and the planet. So, we have real differences, but I like Joe, I respect Joe, and I look forward to an issue-oriented campaign, nothing to do with personal attacks.
Now, in line with the policies you've said, you and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, you began saying, has really laid out a legislative package and policy that would deal with a lot of what is going on in terms of where Wall Street has made benefits. How does this impact the average American that's watching this show?
Big time, Al, big time. There was a recent report that came out from the Fed, and that report said that half of America has virtually no wealth at all. People have nothing in the bank. You got half of this country living paycheck to paycheck. So if a kid gets sick or somebody ends up in the hospital or your car breaks down, people have got to borrow money. And they use a credit card to borrow that money. And what we find is that at a time when Wall Street gets 2.5% money from the Fed, they are charging median interest rates of 21%. Half the American people are paying more than that. That, Al, is usury. That is loan sharking. And that has got to be ended, because we are seeing people paying a significant part of their income on interest rates, on high debts, because their incomes have been stagnant. So this really deals with the greed of Wall Street, and we have got to end those types of usurious interest rates.
Whoever is the nominee at the end of the primaries is going to then have to face, we assume, President Donald Trump. Do you believe that America will vote for someone that has described themselves as a socialist and that they will not see your policies as a socialist policies that's changing the very nature of what this country they believe was built on?
Well, I am a democratic socialist, and what that means to me, and I should preface that, Al, by saying that every major piece of legislation, whether it was Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, you name it, has been defined by Republicans from way back to today as being socialistic. But I believe that health care is a human right. I believe that Medicare is the most popular health insurance program in the country today. And I see no reason why, over a 4-year period, we should not expand Medicare to every man, woman, and child in this country. And we can do that at the same time as we save the average person a significant sum of money on his or her health care bills.
Now,
I believe...
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Let me ask you this. In order to win the nomination, any candidate is going to be challenged to get significant black votes. And clearly in the last 2 years, you have worked very hard to make impact in terms of black voters. You were well received at National Action Network's convention, and a lot of what you said. How do you deal with the race gap? Because when we deal with usury, there's a disproportionate amount in the black community. When we deal with issues of unemployment, even in an economy where we've got the unemployment rate down 3%, blacks are almost 7% unemployed, more than double. How do we close the race gap where we have the conversation about reparations or affirmative action? Because just to deal with some usury and not deal with the race part of that is still going to leave us unequal.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Al. Look, the way I see it, the big picture is we have massive levels of income and wealth disparity in America. 3 families owning more wealth than the bottom half of America. But within all of that, you have racial disparities where white families today own 10 times more wealth than black families, whereas was recently reported, unbelievably, black women in childbirth are dying at rates equivalent to third world countries. Infant mortality rates 2.5 times higher in the black community. Redlining exists, criminal justice system largely racist. So what I think we've got to do, and Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, I think, had a really good idea. And he said that 10% of all federal funds should go into distressed communities where unemployment is high, where the schools are inadequate, and where health care is not available to people. And that will mean significantly funding communities of color all over this country. And that is what I think we have got to do to begin to deal with the racial disparities which are a product of institutional racism in the United States.
All right, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont never ducks a question. Thank you for your time.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.